The early morning haze still clung to the chain-link fence surrounding Emory Dynamics when Detective Elena Morales' unmarked Ford sedan rolled to a stop. She killed the engine and stepped onto the cracked concrete, her polished boots clicking against oil-stained pavement. The factory gates, adorned with peeling yellow warning signs, authorized personnel only, high-voltage equipment, creaked open as a weary night shift guard lifted the latch. Beyond lay a cavernous workshop. Steel beams arched overhead, and the scent of cutting fluid and hot metal hung heavy in the chill air. Detective Morales drew in a slow breath. She carried a standard-issue notebook, its pages crisp but already smudged with the shorthand of routine calls. Safety alarm, possible malfunction. Lead arrived on scene. She followed the guard past rows of dormant CNC lathes and milling machines, their dark metal forms looming like mechanical beasts at rest. Overhead, the catwalk's grated flooring rattled as a lone maintenance technician shoveled debris into a bin below. At the heart of the plant, near the massive gear-shaped safety interlock, stood Malik Freeman. He was tall, lean, and impeccably dressed in a Navy engineer's jacket, rolled-up sleeves revealing sinewy forearms. His dark eyes were fixed on the exposed mechanism, where a sensor block and a spring-loaded plunger should snap together under pressure. Instead, the plunger hung limply. Sparks of concern flickered in Malik's gaze, an engineer's instinct honed by years of precision work. "Detective Morales?" he called, voice steady but urgent. He extended a hand, calloused fingertips brushing against her gloved palm. "Thank you for coming so quickly." She offered a polite nod, eyes narrowing as she studied his ID badge. "Monsieur Freeman, Senior Safety Engineer." Under her breath, she wondered if he was overreacting. Safety alarms triggered weekly, and most turned out to be false positives. Still, she owed him a fair hearing. Malik led her to the interlock's control panel. Rows of indicator lights, green for OK, red for fault, blinked erratically. "Last night, the motor shut down unexpectedly," he explained, pointing to the schematic taped to the console. "That plunger failed to engage. If we'd been at full speed, the cutoff wouldn't have tripped. A runaway rotor could have shredded the drive shaft, and anyone nearby." Detective Morales tapped her pen against her notepad. "Any recorded errors?" she asked, glancing at the panel's logging module. "Maintenance logs show nothing unusual." He sighed, smooth and controlled. "That's because the offset is microscopic, 0.03 millimeters. We're talking a hair's breadth. Not enough to register in the routine diagnostics, but under load, it's critical." He crouched, removing a small cover to reveal the sensor block's mounting bracket. "I designed this fixture," Malik said, voice low. "I've tolerances down to 5 microns in my CAD files, but someone must have misaligned the block during last week's retrofit." Morales closed her notebook and folded her arms. The harsh fluorescent lights glared overhead as shade from the catwalk grid cast sharp lines across Malik's determined expression. She'd heard his claim and politely listened, but her experience told her that plants often overdramatized minor glitches. As far as she was concerned, it was operator error until proven otherwise. She squared her shoulders, ready to file the report and clear the factory to restart. However, in the back of her mind, Malik's precise concern lodged like a splinter, waiting for the moment it might be pried free by undeniable evidence. Detective Morales stepped deeper into the cavernous workshop, her boots echoing against the concrete floor. Overhead cranes slung heavy steel plates from one bay to the next, and a low hum of idle motors vibrated through the air. She glanced at her notepad, flicking to a fresh page, and raised an eyebrow at the blinking red fault light on the interlock panel. The rest of the machine bay lay silent, no alarms, no sputters, yet the indicator insisted something was amiss. "Show me exactly what happened," she said, voice steady as Malik Freeman led her toward the interlock housing. He gestured at the spring-loaded plunger assembly, its machine surfaces gleaming under flickering fluorescence. "Last night, the safety cutoff failed once during our end-of-line test," he explained. "I got an email alert, raced down, and found the plunger only halfway seated. Under high torque, it would have bypassed the lock entirely." Morales nodded, jotting "safety alarm, 0007" in the margin. "Let's talk to the operators on duty," she suggested. She motioned toward a cluster of workstations where 3-line technicians stood around a half-assembled gearbox. Their oil-stained overalls and calloused hands spoke of long hours. One man yawned, instinctively rubbing his wrist. He looked up at Morales with detached interest. "Morning, detective," he greeted without enthusiasm. "We heard the interlock tripped around 2 a.m. Came in to check it, but everything looked fine this morning." He shrugged, tapping the gearbox with a gloved hand. "Probably just a glitch. We rebooted the line and ran it through diagnostics. No error codes popped." Morales's pen paused. "Did you notice any unusual vibrations? Strange sounds?" she asked. The technician frowned. "Nope. CNCs hum like bees. Nothing out of the ordinary. If that plunger didn't seat, you'd hear grinding or the motor would stall." He returned to adjusting a wrench. She moved on to a second operator, a woman wiping sweat from her brow. "I'm Detective Morales. Any idea why the interlock might misbehave?" The woman glanced at Malik, then back at Morales. "That plant manager's nuts," she muttered under her breath, eyes flitting toward his navy jacket. "If he wasn't so picky about tolerances, we'd be up by dawn. But as far as we're concerned, it's user error. Someone didn't close the access door right." Morales closed her notebook. Each response rang hollow. No alarms logged, no sensor faults recorded, and line workers quick to blame human error. She returned to the control panel and ran her fingers over the keypad, then tapped a few commands to simulate a reset. The panel obeyed without hesitation. The red light snapped off, replaced by the reassuring glow of green. She exhaled, scribbling her conclusion. "Intermittent fault appears operator-related. Recommend line restart." Malik's shoulders sagged slightly. He cleared his throat. "Detective, the misalignment I described wouldn't trip diagnostics. It's too small to register. Under load, though, it's deadly." Morales met his gaze, brows drawing together. Despite the flat reassurance in her report, a seed of doubt had taken root. Perhaps this was more than another routine false alarm. Detective Morales sat alone in the pale glow of her desk lamp long after the station's lights had dimmed. The buzz of the fluorescent fixtures overhead had been replaced by the steady hum of her computer's cooling fan and the distant click of a police radio on standby. She'd logged off her initial report on Emory Dynamics. Operator error. Recommend factory restart. But something gnawed at her. The safety interlock had tripped without leaving a trace in the maintenance logs. No error codes, no alarms beyond the single red light. Her instincts, honed over years of chasing more tangible crimes, whispered that Malik Freeman's warning deserved more than polite dismissal. Across town, Malik Freeman reclined in his dimly lit home office, the glow of 3 monitors illuminating his furrowed brow. On the largest screen, his CAD model of the interlock assembly stood in perfect virtual alignment. Next to it, a stream of raw sensor data scrolled in columns of numbers and timestamps. He traced the live data from the test run. A spike in torque here, a millisecond's delay in the sensor response there, and overlaid it on the schematic. With a practiced hand, he zoomed in to examine the mounting bracket's geometry. There it was, a microscopic offset of 30 microns, invisible to the plant's diagnostics, but enough, under heavy load, to let the plunger float free. He opened a second window to his email client, fingers tapping out a polite but urgent message to Detective Morales. Subject: Emory Dynamics. Interlock test. Critical offset identified. He attached annotated screenshots showing the misalignment in red, along with a side-by-side comparison of the correct versus incorrect sensor positions. He explained that the plant's routine reboot would never catch this subtle defect, that only a targeted measurement could reveal the flaw. Then, with a final click, he pressed send, hoping she would take the time to look at the evidence rather than sign off on a simple operator error. Meanwhile, Morales' phone buzzed on her desk. She rubbed her tired eyes and glanced at the screen. An email from Monsieur Freeman, Senior Safety Engineer. She opened it and the attachments popped up. A high-resolution screenshot of the interlock's 3D model, a red outline marking the tiny misplacement, and a chart mapping torque spikes to sensor delays. As she zoomed in, she felt a jolt of realization. This was no anomaly. It was exactly the kind of hard-to-detect misalignment an engineer of Freeman's caliber would catch. Her notebook lay open, the word operator still faint on the margin. Now, faced with concrete data rather than speculation, she drafted a quick reply. I'd like to discuss these findings on site, tomorrow at first light. By the time she hit send, the first birds were beginning to stir outside her window. Detecting injustice, whether in human affairs or in the hidden workings of a machine, had always required persistence and the courage to trust the evidence. Morales shut down her computer with renewed determination, and Malik leaned back in his chair, hope brightening his tired eyes. Both knew that tomorrow's visit to Emory Dynamics would be very different from the one before. Detective Morales pulled her unmarked SUV into Emory Dynamics' rear lot, just as the morning shift's turbines began to hum, the low drone echoing through the crisp industrial air. Malik Freeman was waiting beside the locked safety interlock housing, holding a clipboard filled with his annotated CAD printouts. The pale daylight streamed in through high clear-story windows, casting long, angular shadows across the grease-stained concrete floor. Around them, the smell of cutting fluid and machine oil mingled with the faint metallic tang of fresh sparks from a distant welding station. Without a word, Malik led her to the interlock assembly. He peeled back the protective cover and pointed to the sensor block's mounting bracket, where a fine hairline of light betrayed the misalignment. Here, he said, tapping the bracket lightly with a slender screwdriver. It's off by just 30 microns. Morales frowned, leaning in until the bracket filled her vision. Her breath caught at the sight. The precision-machined faces of the sensor and plunger bore a gap so slight it was nearly imperceptible, yet wide enough that under rotational force, the plunger could slide past without engaging. She pulled a digital caliper from her coat pocket, standard issue for detective-issued scene measurements, and clamped its jaws around the sensor block's base. The display flickered, 0.030 millimeters. Her eyes widened. This was beyond any ordinary diagnostic threshold. She tried again at a different point, and the reading repeated. The offset was real. Morales straightened and met Malik's gaze. 30 microns, she murmured, voice low. He nodded, relief and urgency mingling in his expression. She gestured to a nearby control panel. Show me your torque logs from last night. They stepped to the console, rows of blinking LEDs and a touchscreen interface reflecting on Morales' focused face. As Malik scrolled through time-stamped records, a sharp spike in torque jumped out at precisely 2:14 a.m., exactly the moment the morning guard had reported the shutdown. Morales watched the graph's jagged peak, then glanced back at the interlock. The faulty alignment had allowed the rotor's momentum to overwhelm the safety catch. Power it up, she said, tone brisk. Malik flipped switches and engaged the test sequence. The massive rotor spun to life with a low whine, then ramped up to operating speed. Morales stood close, her shoulders squared and eyes unblinking. At full velocity, the plunger hesitated, then slid past its seat. No clamping click, no cutoff. The machine surged forward, the hum deepening to a menacing growl before Malik killed the power. Morales exhaled slowly, the enormity of what she had witnessed settling in. She turned to Malik. You were absolutely right, she admitted, voice steady but grave. Had we ignored this, someone could have been killed. She offered her hand, which he shook firmly. Around them, the factory's noises resumed, a workshop alive with potential hazards, but now guided by the certainty that their vigilance would prevent catastrophe. In that moment, the evidence she had once doubted had changed everything. The morning sun slanted through the high windows of Emory Dynamics' main workshop as Malik Freeman assembled his demonstration station. A polished workbench stood beside the safety interlock housing, its surface cleared of stray tools and coated with a layer of clean, anti-slip rubber matting. On one end rested Malik's laptop, its screen poised over a live data feed. On the other, a calibrated torque wrench, a digital caliper, and a small weight rig he'd designed to replicate the exact force parameters of the plant's drive motor. Around him, a half-dozen senior engineers and Detective Morales formed a tight semicircle, their faces a mixture of skepticism and cautious curiosity. Thank you all for coming, Malik began, voice steady. He tapped the laptop, and a graph of last night's torque spikes filled the screen, sharp peaks at 2:14 a.m., matching the moment the interlock failed. Morales nodded, arms crossed. as Malik pointed to the flat plateau that followed each spike. Here's where the safety catch should have engaged, cutting power in under 16 milliseconds. Instead, the rotor coasted freely. He hooked the weight assembly, a 20-kilogram brass block, into the interlock's trigger arm and secured the rig with nylon straps. This replicates the exact torque load we see under normal startup, he explained, eyes sweeping the group. Watch the plunger. Malik flipped the switch. With a low hum, the interlock's test rotor spun. The weight swung outward, pressing against the sensor block. The assembled engineers leaned in as the mechanism whirred through its cycle, but no metallic click rang out. The rotor kept spinning, and the weight oscillated wildly until Malik snapped the power off. A tense silence settled. Ideally, Malik said, stepping forward, the plunger would clamp against the block and arrest motion instantly, preventing any hazardous overrun. He crouched, carefully loosening the sensor block mounting screws with his torque wrench. The group watched his hands slide the block inward by an imperceptible quarter turn of the gauge, approximately 0.03 millimeters. He retorqued the screws to factory spec, then stood, wiping his palm on a clean rag. Second test, he announced. Malik reset the laptop counter and restarted the rotor. The brass weight swung out once more. This time, the audience heard a crisp, mechanical click, followed by an immediate halt in the rotor's spin. The weight dropped gently against the stopped platen. On the screen, the torque graph showed the expected spike, then a sudden flatline as power was cut. A murmur rippled through the engineers. Morales' stern facade softened. She exhaled, stepping forward. That was exactly what we needed to see, she said. Heads nodded as the plant manager approached Malik's bench, extending a hand. Your precision saved us from catastrophe, he admitted. Engineers gathered around, inspecting the adjusted block and muttering about integrating Malik's procedure into the next maintenance cycle. Malik allowed himself a small smile. In that demonstration, first failure, then success. The evidence had spoken unambiguously. What began as a dispute over millimeters had transformed into a shared commitment to safety. As the team dispersed to implement the new alignment checks, Detective Morales lingered beside Malik's station, her expression one of respect. The interlock's plunger, now perfectly seated, stood as proof that even the smallest misalignment can have enormous consequences, and that true expertise demands both rigorous data and the courage to act upon it. Detective Elena Morales stood motionless in the workshop's harsh fluorescent glare, her arms folded over the badge on her chest as she stared at the now perfectly aligned safety interlock. The low hum of the plant's machinery had begun again, but it felt distant, muted by the weight of what she had just witnessed. The stainless steel workbench where Malik Freeman had conducted his demonstration was still warm from the torque tests, tiny metal shavings glinting in the light. She drew a slow breath, the faint scent of cutting fluid and hot metal filling her lungs. Turning to face Malik, she found him gathering his laptop and tools, his expression calm but with a flash of apprehension in his dark eyes. Her notebook lay open on the bench, pages filled with her initial findings, pages she now knew to be wrong. Mr. Freeman, she began, her voice quieter than usual but grit-edged with sincerity. I owe you an apology. Her words seemed oversized in the cavernous space. The clatter of a distant mill cut off as the plant manager and several senior engineers halted their work, noticing the exchange. Malik set down his calipers and gave a small, cautious nod. Morales continued, I dismissed your expertise too quickly. I called this a simple operator error, when in fact you were identifying a dangerous design flaw. She stepped forward, removing her gloves and holding them out in an unspoken gesture of truce. I'm sorry I didn't trust your judgment. You saved lives here today. Silence stretched. Then Malik reached out, taking her gloved hands in his steady grip. Thank you for admitting it, he said softly. Now let's make sure it never happens again. Morales nodded, scanning the workshop floor as the hum returned to normal. I want to work with you on a new safety protocol, one that includes your alignment checks in every maintenance cycle. Her gaze met his with clear resolve. Around them, the engineers resumed their tasks, but with renewed purpose. Evidence had won the day, and distrust had given way to collaboration. 2 weeks later, The sun streamed through wide skylights into Emery Dynamics' newly reconfigured safety bay, illuminating rows of gleaming laser-guided alignment jigs and precision calibration gauges, now mounted beside every interlock housing. The air smelled of fresh paint and the faint tang of metal filings, proof that the workshop had transformed from a passive factory floor into a living laboratory of preventative safety. Detective Elena Morales walked the polished concrete aisle alongside Malik Freeman, her notebook tucked under one arm. She paused at the main control panel, where a bold placard read, "Safety by Design." Courtesy of M. Freeman, lead engineer Morales traced a fingertip along the placard's edge, the paper crisp and unwrinkled. "This is impressive," she admitted, voice echoing against the high ceiling. "You've turned your near miss into a blueprint for zero-failure operation." Malik smiled, shoulders relaxed for the first time in weeks. "We installed these laser-guided jigs to ensure sensor blocks seat within 5 microns every time. And these digital gauges," he tapped a device mounted on the interlock frame, "verify alignment before power-up. If any reading drifts beyond threshold, the system locks out automatically." They approached a demonstration station where a junior engineer, a tall young woman in safety glasses, prepared to run the new auto-check routine. As the engineer initiated the cycle, a soft blue beam from the jig swept across the sensor block, and the digital gauge beeped green. The engine roared to life, spun up to operational speed, then held steady without incident. Morales nodded appreciatively. "It's a hairline's margin of error that could have cost lives," she said. "Now it's a guaranteed pass or fail. No guesswork." Malik led her to a corner where a touchscreen kiosk displayed real-time safety metrics. 0 interlock errors in over 250 startup cycles, 5 corrective alignments performed automatically, and a 100% compliance rate among all maintenance staff trained in the new protocol. Morales tapped the screen, her reflection mingling with the data. "This dashboard is brilliant. It makes accountability visible." As they toured the rest of the bay, past signage highlighting daily safety stand-ups and continuous improvement workshops, Morales felt a surge of respect for the engineer who had turned skepticism into collaboration. At the exit, she extended her hand. "Thank you, Malik, for not giving up," she said. "Your persistence will keep every technician and operator safe." He gripped her hand firmly. "And thank you for trusting the evidence," he replied. Together, they stepped out into the afternoon light, knowing that Emery Dynamics was no longer just a plant. It was a showcase of how courage, expertise, and rigorous data could safeguard tomorrow, 1 micron at a time.